Hello everyone, and in this video we will be looking at the rules covering defensive fire. Defensive fire can only occur in the enemy movement phase and can only be used versus a moving unit. Anytime an enemy unit or stack spends movement points in line of sight of the defender has the option of temporarily halting the movement by declaring they wish to fire. All units that fire are marked with a first fire counter if they have exhausted their rate of fire. Units marked with a first fire counter may only fire again as subsequent first fire or final protective fire or intensive fire. Defensive first fire only affects the moving units and not any other units in the same location. Once a unit stops moving, it may not be subject anymore to defensive fire. It's German movement phase, and the German units are presently situated in V5 and a squadron leader in V6 with a Russian squad down in V8. The German player decides he wishes to move his squad in V5 into V6, as this is a wood hex, costs 2 movement points. 2. At this point the Russian player declares that he wishes to make a first fire attack and declares he will fire. Any attack from this 447 only affects the 467 squad that moved in from V5 to V6 and not the squad and leader presently already situated in V6. If this squad moved from V5 to V6 should survive any fire, the German may continue moving it or decide to move something else, which means it will then end its movement phase. A unit may be fired on more than once per location, but only by different enemy units, unless the enemy unit has rate of fire, or the enemy unit can claim subsequent first fire or final protective fire, and the moving unit has spent more than one movement point in that location. Besides the usual dice roll modifications that affect combat, 2 special modifiers affect defensive fire combat. The first one is first fire movement in the open. If a moving unit moves into a new location and does not receive any terrain effects modifiers or hindrance modifiers, then that attack receives a -1 to the dice roll. It is the Finnish movement turn. There's a Finnish squad over here in T4 and a Russian squad down here in V6. The Finnish player decides to move his 648 into U5 using assault movement. 1 movement point. The Russian player decides to declare a fire attack on the Finnish unit in U5. Because there's no train effects modifier or hindrance modifier, the Russian attack will have a -1 to his dice roll. So if you roll a 6, this will drop down to a 5. It's the American movement phase, and the Americans have a unit in AA7, and there's a German squad over here in V6. The Americans decide they wish to move into Z6. 1 to cross a hedge, 2 into Z6. German player decides he wishes to fire and declares a fire attack against the moving American unit. Because of the brush hex in X6, which causes a hindrance, there is no -1 for first fire movement in the open against the American squad. The second one is first fire non-assault movement. Any moving unit which does not declare it is using assault movement receives a -1 to any attack dice roll. It's French movement phase, and there's a French squad in V5 and an Italian squad down here in U8. The French player decides he wishes to move to V6 for 2 movement points. Now, as he has not declared that he's using assault movement, even if he wishes to end his movement in that hex, he must still receive a -1 dice roll modifier to any attack that the Italian unit should make if it declares first fire. It is the French movement phase, and they have a squad here in X6. There's an Italian squad down here in U8. French player decides to move into W7, where the Italian decides he wishes to attack and declares he will fire. Now, as the French squad has not declared assault movement, it suffers the first fire non-assault movement, and as also it has no train effects modifiers or hindrance modifiers affecting the hex it's just moved into, it also receives a -1 first fire movement in the open. So some see it has -2 on the dice roll by the Italian squad. So if its roll was 6, this will drop down to a 4. When we do not have line of sight to a hex, but do to a hex side an enemy unit crosses, we can declare a snapshot. A snapshot may only use a unit's inherent firepower or machine gun that does not need to change its covered arc. First fire movement in the open or first fire non-assault movement is not applied to a snapshot. The only terrain effects modifiers that affect snapshots are walls, hedges, smoke or rubble. Snapshots are area fire. A unit may make only one snapshot against a moving unit, irrespective of how many movement points the enemy unit spends. If the moving unit should suffer an adverse effect, it is considered to be in the hex it was entering. During the British movement phase, the British 457 squad up here in J2 decides it wishes to move to K2. The German squad down here in M6 can't presently see J2 and it can't see K2, but it can see the hex between the two, the hex side, this one here. So when the British player moves for 2, it can claim fire as a snapshot. Being area fire, of course its firepower is dropped down to 2. It's in range, so that is the only thing that affects it, but it cannot claim first fire non-assault movement, and it can't claim first fire movement in the open. If when the snapshot occurs, which officially occurs at this point, the British unit should be pinned, it would actually be pinned in K2, as that's the hex it was actually trying to enter. Every time a unit is attacked by defensive first fire, subsequent first fire and final protective fire, the target location may be marked with a residual firepower counter equal to half the firepower column, subject to adjustments used in the attack, up to a maximum of 12. Snapshots never leave residual firepower. During the German movement phase, we have a German squad in M1 and a Russian squad down here in K4. Germans decides to move the squad in M1 across to L1. 1. The Russian player decides he wishes to fire at the German squad. His attack of 4 fire points, -1 first fire non-assault movement, -1 first fire movement in the open, misses. The Russian player is obviously marked with first fire counter, but leaves 2 residual fire points in L1 as he fired on the 4 firepower column, which is halved down to 2. And the German player may continue his move. 2. For every positive dice roll modifier, not wholly in the location, which affects the attacker's dice roll, including hexside terrain, crew exhausted, button up, stun, leadership modifier, but excluding height advantage, reduces the amount of residual firepower to the next lower column. This is a German movement phase, and the German player wishes to move his squad in P6 to 08, 1 movement factor. The American squad in 06 decides to fire. The combat in this case would be a 6, +1 for the hedge edge here, -1 for first fire non-assault movement. Even though the squad is moving in the open, because of the hex edge hedge, there is no first fire movement in the open. On the subsequent roll, the German squad is pinned. Residual fire points left here are half of what was used. So in this case, 6 down to 3. But as we haven't got a 3 column, we must drop down to the next lowest column, which is a 2. But because of the +1 modifier, this hedge on the hex edge, we have to drop that by an extra column. So this actually will take us from 2 down to 1. So the residual fire counter which we put in here will be a 1. Every time a unit moves into or spends movement factors or points in a location containing a residual firepower counter, that unit is subject to attack dice roll using the empty firepower column represented by the residual firepower counter. All in location dice roll modifiers, first fire movement in the open and first fire non-assault movement, apply as normal. It is the minor axis player's movement phase. He's already moved one squad from S9 into S8. The Russian squad in R6 has attacked this and left a total of 2 residual fire points in S8. The Axis minor player now decides to move his other squad from S9 into S8 using assault movement. Total of 3. Residual fire points now attacks the squad, so the Russian player rolls on the 2 column with a +2 for the wooden building added to the dice roll. Residual firepower always attack alone and is the first attack against a unit. A unit may only be attacked once by residual firepower per location, except if the amount of residual firepower increases or the unit is subject to more negative dice roll modifiers. It will be attacked again if it spends more movement points or factors in that location. Only one residual firepower counter may be in a location. If a future attack would leave a higher amount of residual firepower, replace the previous counter with the higher value. Residual firepower does not attack until any activity that a movement factor or points allowed is completed. A rate of fire weapon does not leave residual firepower if it retains its rate of fire, unless it forfeits its rate of fire. Units that can use spray and fire can make a spray and fire attack against a moving unit. This allows the defender to place residual firepower in more than one location. All spray and fire rules apply as normal. It's the Russian movement phase. The Russian unit in R7 decides to move to R8. German squad down in Q10 decides to first fire, and he declares that he's going to use spray and fire. The other hex he will attack will be S9. This is just in case the Russian unit in S8 decides to move to S9 in its movement phase, so we can put some residual firepower into S9. Some see attacks with a strength of 2 against R8 and S9. The attack against the Russian unit is a miss. It now leaves residual firepower. As attacked with 2, it goes down to the next column, which is a 1. So it leaves 1 residual firepower in each hex. If there had been actually a unit in S9, that unit is not attacked, as you can only attack the moving unit. A unit already marked with a first fire counter may defensive fire again as area fire. Turn the first fire counter over to its final fire side. Machine guns and infantry fire equivalent weapons must use sustained fire. Only a unit's inherent fire, machine guns and infantry fire equivalent weapons may use subsequent first fire. You may only use subsequent first fire against units in normal range, and it must be the closest armed known enemy unit. Subsequent first fire, like first fire, can be used when an enemy spends movement factors or points. A unit must use any machine guns and infantry fire equivalent weapons it possesses up to the maximum allowed, and they must use them with the unit's inherent firepower. The attacking player may decide to not use these weapons, but forfeits their use for the remainder of that player turn. A multiple rate of fire weapon cannot be fired more than once per subsequent first fire attack. It's the German movement phase, and they have a squad here in N7, and there's a Russian squad down here in K9. German player decides to move to M8 for 2 movement factors. 2. The Russian player decides to first fire against the German squad and gets a pin task check, which the German squad fails. The Russian squad is then marked with a first fire marker. Because the German squad actually spent 2 movement factors to enter M8, the Russian player can subsequently first fire on the second movement factor that was spent, which he does. We then mark it with a final fire marker. The Russian player now attacks with 2 movement firepower, as this is classified as area fire. It's German movement phase. There's a German squad down here in Q9, another one here in R7, another one up here in P5. The Russian player has already first fired against the German unit in R7. The German player now decides to move his squad down here in Q9 into P8 for 2. The Russian player may subsequent first fire against the German squad. Even though there's another squad up here 2 hexes away, same distance as the one down here in P8, it can't be seen, it's out of line of sight, so it's not a known enemy unit. And the other squad here in R7 is 3 hexes away. It's the German moves phase again. There's a German squad in P5, another one in O6. The Russian player has a squad down here in N7, which has first fired against the German squad in O6. The Germans now decide to move the squad in P5 into P6. In this case, the Russian player can't subsequent first fire, as there is a German squad in its line of sight, so it's a known armed enemy unit in O6, which is exactly the same distance, 2 hexes, as the one to P6. Final protective fire may be used by units marked with a final fire counter against enemy moving units in the same or adjacent hex. All machine guns and infantry fire equivalent weapons up to the unit's maximum allowed must fire even if not marked with a final fire marker, and are subject to sustained fire penalties. Final protective fire is a combination of area fire with either point blank fire or triple point blank fire. Units using final protective fire are subject to a normal morale check using the same dice roll as the combat dice roll. The only dice roll modifier applicable is a leadership dice roll modifier. All machine guns and infantry fire equivalent weapons are marked with a final fire counter even if they retain rate of fire. There is no limit to the amount of final protective fire attacks a unit may make, except a unit eligible to make triple point blank fire may not fire at an adjacent enemy unit. Thank you for watching. If you found this video useful, please leave a like as it helps the channel. Bye for now.